The woman at counter 3 of the Korle-Bu Teaching Hospital Pharmacy in Accra had been counting the same 11 cedis and 40 pesewas for 8 minutes when the pharmacist told her the medication cost 47 cedis and she would need to come back when she had the rest. She did not argue. She counted the coins again, as though the number might change if she touched them in a different order. It did not change. She put them back in the small cloth pouch, navy blue, the drawstring worn almost to thread, and asked the pharmacist, quietly, if there was a less expensive version of the same thing. The pharmacist looked at the prescription slip, looked at her, and said there was not. He looked back at his screen. The child behind her in the plastic chair was 4 years old. His name was Kofi. He had a fever of 39.4 degrees that had not broken in 18 hours. His mother, Adeze Nwosu, was 31 years old, 109 pounds, and wearing a blue dress she had washed by hand the evening before in the hospital bathroom sink so that she would not smell of 2 days without sleep when she went to ask for help. She picked up the cloth pouch. She picked up her son. She walked out of the pharmacy into the corridor and sat down on the floor outside the door with her back against the wall and her son's head on her shoulder, and stayed very still for a moment. She did not know that the woman who had been waiting behind her in the queue had watched all of this. She did not know that this woman was already making a decision, and she did not know. No one in that corridor knew who the woman's husband was, or what the meaning of that decision would become before the week was through. Adeze Nwosu had come to Accra from Enugu 14 months ago. She had come because her husband, Emmanuel, had found work at a construction firm on the Tema motorway extension, and because the apartment his employer offered was large enough for both of them, and small enough that they could save money for the first time since Kofi was born. She had been saving. She kept the savings in the same navy blue pouch as the coins. There was a compartment at the back, sealed with a zip that had started to stick in December, and every Monday morning she put away whatever was left from the week's food money. By January, she had saved 280 cedis. By March, Emmanuel had been let go from the construction firm in a round of contract cuts that affected 31 workers. By April, the 280 cedis were gone. She had found cleaning work at a guest house on the Osu Boundary Road, 4 mornings a week, 30 cedis a day, which came to 480 cedis a month if all 4 weeks were full, which they sometimes were not. She had found a second job on Wednesday afternoons preparing orders at a cosmetics stall in Osu Market, 12 cedis per session. She got up at 4:30 every morning. She was home by 7 o'clock every evening. She made Kofi's dinner herself and bathed him and told him the same story her own mother had told her when she was small. The one about the tortoise who walked so slowly that everyone laughed until the day he arrived somewhere nobody else had the patience to reach. Emmanuel was still looking for work. This was not a complaint. This was a fact she carried the way she carried the blue pouch, quietly, in a place close to her body, not shown to anyone who did not need to see it. The gold ring she was wearing on her right hand was the last piece of jewelry she owned. Her grandmother, Mama Chidi, had given it to her the week before she died, pressing it onto Adeze's finger with hands that were thin and warm and smelled of shea butter, and something she could never name precisely, only recognize. The ring was yellow gold, 18 karat, small in diameter, with a braided pattern around the band that had worn smoother on one side from 53 years of wearing. Adeze had worn it every day for 6 years. She had not planned to sell it. She had not planned for Kofi's fever to begin at 11:15 on a Tuesday night, either, or for Emmanuel to be 40 kilometers away that week on a possible construction lead in Tema. or for the hospital taxi to cost 22 cedis, that left her with only 11 cedis and 40 pesewas by the time she reached the pharmacy counter. She had not planned for any of it. She sat on the floor of the hospital corridor with her son's head on her shoulder and counted, in her mind, what remained. The cloth pouch contained 11 cedis and 40 pesewas. Her phone had 14% battery. Emmanuel was not answering. She had tried 4 times since 6 a.m. There was a woman at her church, Sister Constance, who might be able to help. But Adese had already borrowed 60 cedis from Sister Constance in March and had paid back only 40 of it. There was her neighbor from the guest house, a Liberian woman named Pauline, but Pauline was sending her whole salary back to Monrovia every month, and there was nothing there to ask for. She was trying to think of a fifth option when she heard footsteps stop in front of her. The woman who stopped was 46 years old, and her name was Amamensa Owusu. She was not tall, 5'4", and she was wearing a simple kente print wrap dress she had owned for 3 years, its edges slightly frayed at the hem in a way she had not gotten around to fixing. She smelled faintly of lavender fabric softener and the particular warm rubber smell of a hospital she had been sitting inside since 7th that morning. She was visiting her own mother, who was on the 3rd floor in room 14B with a hip that had been operated on the previous Thursday. She had been in the pharmacy queue to collect her mother's discharge medications. She had watched the entire exchange at counter 3, the counting, the pharmacist's response, the woman's second counting, the quiet question about a cheaper version, the pharmacist not looking up. She had watched Adese pick up the child and walk out. She followed her into the corridor. She stood in front of the woman on the floor and said, "How much do you need?" Adese looked up. She did not look grateful. She looked tired, in the specific way of someone who has been running a long distance and has just stopped to find the finish line is not where she expected it. She said, 36 cedis. Amamensa Owusu opened her bag. She had 60 cedis in her wallet, the same 60 she had withdrawn that morning for her mother's hospital transport. She counted out 40 and held it down. Adese said, "I can't take your taxi money." Amma said, "My daughter is coming to pick me up at noon." Adese looked at the 40 cedis. She looked at her son. She reached up and took the money. Her hand was steady. She said, "I will pay you back." Amma said, "No need," and turned to go back to the pharmacy. If this story is already settling somewhere in your chest, stay with me, because what happens over the next 3 days changes the meaning of everything that came before it. Adese got the medication. She got Kofi back to the apartment on Zongo Lane in Accra, New Town by 10:45 that morning and gave him the first dose at 11:00 and sat beside him on the mat where he slept and watched him breathe and called Emmanuel 4 more times, and on the 5th call he answered, out of breath, apologizing, the phone signal cutting in and out from Tema. She told him about the fever. She told him about the pharmacy. She did not tell him about the ring. She had not sold the ring yet. Not at that moment. She had thought about it in the taxi on the way home, the ring's weight on her finger, familiar and specific, the braided gold her grandmother had given her with hands that smelled of shea butter. She had thought, "I am keeping this. I have given up enough. I am keeping this one thing." She kept thinking this until Thursday. On Thursday, the woman from the apartment 2 doors down, a young woman, 19 years old, named Zinabu, knocked on Adese's door at 7:40 in the evening. Zinabu's baby was 8 weeks old. The baby had been coughing since the previous afternoon. Zinabu had no husband in Accra. He was in Kumasi, and they were not, at present, speaking. And she had no family in the city, and her phone credit had run out on Wednesday, and she had been listening to the cough get worse all through Wednesday night and all through Thursday, and she did not know what to do. She was holding the baby. The baby's breathing had a sound to it, a particular small wet catching sound that Adaize recognized from when Kofi was 3 months old and had bronchiolitis, and she had sat in a clinic in Enugu at 2:00 in the morning listening to exactly this sound. She recognized it. She said, "Give me 5 minutes." She went inside. She put on her other dress, the green one, pressed and folded on the shelf the way her grandmother had taught her, carefully, as though the cloth were worth something precious, because it was. She picked up her phone. She picked up the navy blue pouch. She took off the gold ring and held it in her palm for the length of one breath. Then she put it in the pouch, pulled the sticky zip closed, and went back to the door. She said, "Come." The gold buying stall on Makola Road opened at 8 flow and closed at 8 flow. It was 7:58 when Adaize arrived with Zinabu and the baby, and the man at the counter, a broad-shouldered man in his 60s named Kwadwo, who had been buying and selling gold in that same stall for 29 years, was already pulling down the half-shutter when Adaize knocked on the glass. She held up the ring. He looked at it. He looked at her. He looked at the baby. He came back to the counter. He examined the ring under the glass loop he kept on a cord around his neck. He looked at the hallmark. He set it on the small scale. He said, 110 cedis. She said, "It's 18 carat. He said, "I know what it is. The market price today is 110. She knew this was low. She also knew it was 7:59, and the baby's breathing had not improved. She said, "Fine." He counted out 110 cedis. He put the ring in a small paper envelope without ceremony and set it beneath the counter. She took the money and walked out with Zinabu before the shutter finished coming down. They were at the clinic on Independence Avenue by 8:34. The baby was seen by 9:10. The diagnosis was a lower respiratory infection. Not severe, the doctor said, but if they had waited another day it would have been. He wrote a prescription. The medications cost 73 cedis. Adaize paid. She gave Zinabu the remaining 37 cedis for the taxi home and told her to call if anything changed in the night. She walked home herself. It was 40 minutes. The city was still warm from the day. Accra holds its heat the way it holds everything, close and specific, not letting go easily. She walked and felt the absence of the ring on her finger, the particular lightness of a hand that has worn something for 6 years and now does not. She felt it the whole way. She did not tell Emmanuel about the ring when he came home on Friday night. Not because she was hiding it. She was not. She simply did not find the moment. He came in tired and smelling of cement dust and engine oil, and he sat in the chair by the window, and she gave him food, and they talked about the lead in Tema, which had not become anything, and about Kofi, who was almost completely recovered and had asked 3 times that day whether the tortoise in the story eventually made friends. She did not find the moment. She did not know that the moment had already been found for her. The woman on the 3rd floor of Korle Bu Teaching Hospital, Ama Mensa Owusu's mother, Maame Akosua, 71 years old, recovering from her hip operation in room 14B, had a habit of watching from her window. She had always been this way. For the 47 years she had lived in Accra, she had watched the street below her house the way some people read newspapers, for information, for character, for the connections between things that did not announce themselves. From the window of room 14B, she had a view of the pharmacy courtyard below. She had watched her daughter, on Wednesday morning, follow a woman out of the pharmacy. She had watched the exchange, the 40 cedis, the refusal, the second offer, the acceptance. She had watched her daughter come back into the pharmacy and then go upstairs and say nothing about any of it to her mother, which was how Amma had always been. She gave quietly and did not report it. Mame Akosua did not say anything to her daughter about what she had seen. But she asked the ward nurse, whose sister-in-law happened to clean the wing corridor, what she knew about the woman with the small boy. The nurse knew a little. By Thursday, through the particular lateral network of knowledge that operates in large hospitals and cannot be explained but should not be underestimated. Mame Akosua had a first name. By Friday, she had the rest. She called her daughter at 6:47 on Friday evening. Amma answered in the car on the way home from the hospital. Mame Akosua said, "That woman you gave the 40 cedis to on Wednesday." Amma said, "Mama." Mame Akosua said, "I want to know her name." There was a pause. Amma said, "I don't know her name." "Adeze Nwosu," said Mame Akosua. "She lives on Zongo Lane. She cleans at a guest house on the Osu Boundary Road 4 mornings a week. Her husband is Emmanuel. They have a son, Kofi, 4 years old, recovering from a fever." Another pause. She sold her grandmother's gold ring last night to pay for the medicine of a neighbor's baby. The car was quiet for a moment. Amma said, "How do you know this?" Mame Akosua said, "I pay attention. This is what I have always done. You children do not pay attention. You give 40 cedis and go back to your pharmacy and think you are finished." A pause. "I am not finished." Amma Mensa Owusu's husband was Chief Nana Owusu Boateng, who had built the Owusu Boateng Group from a single commodities trading license in 1998 to a holding company with interests in agribusiness, logistics, and cold chain distribution across West Africa. He was 63 years old. He was not a man who gave speeches about charity or appeared in newspaper profiles about philanthropy. He was a man who had, over 25 years, quietly funded the secondary school education of 41 children from his home region in the Ashanti, none of whom knew his name was attached to the money. He was that kind of man. He was also, on Friday evening, sitting in his study reviewing a logistics contract when his wife came in, sat down in the chair across from him, and told him what her mother had told her. He listened without interruption. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. He said, "The ring." She said, "Her grandmother's ring. 53 years old. Braided band. She gave it to save a neighbor's child." He said she didn't know the father. Amma said, "She still doesn't." He was quiet again. He set the contract down on the desk. He said, "What is the name on the gold stall?" Amma said, "Quadwo's. On Makola Road." He said, "What time does it open?" She said, 8 o'clock. He said, "I'll be there at 7:30. Quadwo had been at his stall since 7:15. He always arrived early on Saturdays, when the car pulled up on Makola Road at 7:28. A black Land Cruiser, older model, the kind that has been maintained for many years rather than replaced. The man who got out of it was not young and not showy. He wore a simple short-sleeved shirt and plain trousers, and he walked to the stall counter with the unhurried ease of a man who had never needed to hurry because the world had learned to wait for him, but who had also never made a point of this. He said, "You received a ring on Thursday evening. Yellow gold, braided band, 18 karat. A woman sold it to you just before closing." Quadwo looked at him for a moment. He said, "I received many rings." The man said, "This one you received at 7:59. You know the one I mean." Quadwo looked at him a moment longer. Then he reached under the counter and found the small paper envelope. He set it on the counter without opening it. The man said, "What did you pay her?" Quadwo said, 110. The man said, The market rate on Thursday evening for 18-karat gold was 162 cedis per gram. What did it weigh? Quadbo said, after a pause, 3 grams. A silence. The man put 486 cedis on the counter in 3 small stacks. He said, "That is the full market value, plus the difference you underpaid her, plus an amount for the early opening." He picked up the paper envelope. He said, "I appreciate the discretion," and walked back to the car. He was on Zongo Lane in Accra, New Town, by 8:14. Emmanuel answered the door. He was in his work clothes. He had been told there was a possible one-day contract at a site near Labadi that morning, and he looked at the man on the step with the expression of someone trying to place a face he did not recognize. The man said, "Is your wife home?" Emmanuel said, "Who is asking?" The man said, "My wife was in the Korlebu pharmacy on Wednesday morning. She gave your wife 40 cedis for your son's medication. My mother-in-law found out what your wife did on Thursday evening. I would like to return something to her." Emmanuel stood very still for a moment. Then he turned into the apartment and said, "Adeze." She came to the door with Kofi on her hip. The boy recovered now and alert, watching the stranger on the step with the serious attention of a 4-year-old who understands that something important is happening without knowing what it is. The man held out the small paper envelope. She looked at it. She looked at him. He said, "Open it." She shifted Kofi to her other hip and opened the envelope with one hand. The ring slid into her palm. The yellow gold, the braided band, worn smooth on one side from 53 years of wearing. She went very still. She said, "How did you?" He said, "My mother-in-law pays attention." She looked at the ring in her palm for a long moment. Then she looked up. She said, "I need to pay your wife back. The 40 cedis." He said, "She said no need." "I do need," Adeze said. He looked at her. He said, "Then pay it forward. That is what she would prefer." He turned to go. He was 3 steps down the building's outer stairs when Adeze said, "Please, who are you?" He stopped. He said, "Nobody important." He kept walking. He was in the car and gone before Emmanuel could think of what to say. Kofi asked, that evening, whether the tortoise in the story ever made friends. Adeze said, "Not the kind of friends you make quickly, the kind you make by going the long way." He thought about this. He said, "Because he was slow?" She said, "Because he kept going." She was wearing the ring again. She could feel it on her finger. The weight of it, the specific warmth of gold that has been worn so long, it holds the temperature of the body it belongs to. She felt her grandmother in it the way she always had, not as an absence, but as a continuing presence, as though Mama Chidi had given her the ring not to wear, but to carry forward. She thought about the woman in the pharmacy corridor who had stopped, who had not walked past, who had given her taxi money without drama and returned to the pharmacy queue as though it were the most ordinary thing. She thought about the man who had arrived at 8:14 on a Saturday morning with a paper envelope, who had given his name as nobody important. Some people, she thought, have decided quietly and entirely to be the kind of person the world needed and got tired of waiting for. They did not announce this decision. They did not make speeches about it. They simply made the decision and then acted from it every time, without calculation, the way you speak your own language, not because you chose to that morning, but because it is simply what you are made of. The guest house where Adeze worked was on the Osu Boundary Road. The owner, a small woman named Ma Mefrema, who had run the guest house for 16 years, and who knew the character of every employee she had ever had within the first week of their starting, called Adeze into the small office behind the front desk, 2 months after the Thursday of the gold ring. She said, "I am going to make you assistant manager." Adeze said, "I don't have a hospitality qualification." Mame Frema said, "You don't need one. You have something better." She looked at her. "You are the kind of person who, when something is needed, does the thing that is needed. Not after thinking about it, not after calculating it, just does it." She paused. "I have been looking for that for 16 years. Qualifications are available everywhere. That is not." The salary was almost double what Adeze had been making. She called Emmanuel from the guest house courtyard after the meeting. He answered on the second ring. She told him. He was quiet for a moment. And then she heard him laughing. The real laugh. The one she had fallen in love with at 22 in a market in Enugu when she had not yet known his name. Just the sound of him finding something genuinely funny. He said, "The tortoise arrived." She said, "The tortoise arrived." What Adeze sold on a Thursday evening was a ring. What she did not sell, what could not be sold, not at any market price, not at any weight, was the particular quality of character that made her stop at a neighbor's door and recognize a sound she had heard before, and go inside, and press the sticky zip on a pouch that held something irreplaceable, and walk out anyway. You can take a person's gold, you can take their savings, their work, their plans, the thing they were keeping for when they had nothing left. You can take all of it, and what remains, what the stall on Makola Road and the sticky zip on the navy blue pouch cannot touch, is the knowledge of what to do when the moment comes, the knowledge of who you are in that moment. This is the only thing that compounds. Everything else can be rebuilt from it. And here is what I want to ask you before you go. There is something you have given away, some version of your grandmother's ring, something you kept for last and then gave anyway, and you have never told anyone what it cost you. If someone knew that story right now, would it change how they saw you? And if it would, why haven't you let them know? Leave your answer in the comments. I really want to read it. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything.